My sister posted a video mocking my cheap apartment and dead-end job, and my father commented, "Haha, so true," with a laughing emoji. By the time I saw it, 9,000 people had already watched it, and my name was floating under the kind of laughter that doesn't fade quickly. My phone lit up in the dark room, the only sound being the slow hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside my thin apartment walls. I didn't respond, didn't type a word, just stared at the screen where family had turned me into content. There was a strange stillness in me, not anger, just clarity. I opened one app, copied one link, and dropped it into the comments without hesitation. By morning, there were 23 missed calls. No explanations, no warnings, just silence answering silence. The damage had already started unfolding quietly outside. My name is not the kind they usually introduce with pride in my family. In my family, attention was a currency I rarely received, and even less often earned without conditions attached. My sister learned early how to perform for approval, and my father rewarded performance more than effort. I learned something quieter, how to observe, remember, and stay underestimated. They called my apartment temporary, even after 3 years of rent receipts. They called my job dead end because it didn't fit their definition of success. But it paid my bills, built my independence, and taught me systems they never cared to understand. At family gatherings, I was the listener, the one who nodded while others told stories louder than truth. My sister would often correct my choices in front of others, smiling like it was concern. My father rarely corrected her. He would laugh instead, as if agreement was easier than fairness. Over time, I stopped explaining myself, not because I had nothing to say, but because they had already decided not to hear it. That silence became my habit. And in that habit, I began noticing things they missed entirely, especially how quickly people forget that being underestimated is sometimes the most dangerous advantage to have in plain sight. It didn't happen all at once. It was always small things, delivered casually, almost carelessly, like they didn't realize they were shaping something. My sister would walk into my apartment and look around with that same half-smile, pausing just long enough on the worn couch or the old kitchen cabinet. "It's cozy," she would say, like she was translating disappointment into politeness. My father never corrected her tone. He would just nod, eyes already drifting past me, as if I were part of the background rather than the room. At dinners, they would talk over me without meaning to hide it. My words would land, pause for a second, then dissolve into someone else's story. Even when I had something solid to say, it was met with that brief silence people use when they decide it's not important enough to continue. My job became a running joke wrapped in concern. "At least it keeps him busy," my sister once said, laughing softly into her glass. The camera was always ready in their hands, but never pointed in my direction for anything serious, only for moments they could frame as harmless humor. I noticed the pattern. I was included, but never elevated. Present, but never respected. And slowly, without announcing itself, that pattern stopped feeling like noise and started feeling like structure. The moment didn't feel dramatic. There was no breaking point, no raised voice, no final argument that changed everything. It was quieter than that. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, phone glowing in my hand, watching the video again. My apartment looked exactly how they described it, small, worn, unpolished. But what they didn't show was the context behind it. The overtime shifts. The nights I chose stability over shortcuts. The months I built things they never asked about. What they turned into a joke was actually a record of everything I survived without help. My sister's caption still sat there like a label, she thought. She had the right to assign. My father's comment, frozen beneath it, felt heavier than the video itself. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something I had already known for a long time. They were comfortable misunderstanding me. I didn't argue in my mind anymore. I didn't rehearse explanations I would never be allowed to finish. Instead, I opened one app I rarely used, the one tied to work, not emotion. I found the link I had saved earlier. Quiet, precise, official. No hesitation this time. I posted it where they were laughing. It wasn't revenge in my head yet. It was just information released into the right hands. I didn't rush after that. The reaction online was not my focus anymore. It was just noise in motion. What mattered was the structure behind what I had posted. The link I shared wasn't emotional. It was documentation. A verified page tied to my professional record, showing exactly what my dead-end job actually involved. Project outcomes, contracts I had managed, systems I had helped stabilize. The kind of details people rarely understand until they're forced to read them slowly, line by line, without someone laughing over it. I knew how these platforms worked. I had spent enough years quietly observing digital behavior to understand what spreads and what sticks. Humiliation spreads fast, but credibility lasts longer if it's visible at the right moment. Before posting, I had already made sure everything was aligned. Timestamps, verified credentials, and public-facing records that couldn't be dismissed as opinion. No exaggeration, no emotional framing, just traceable fact. The kind of information that doesn't argue with people. It simply exists. I also didn't respond to messages afterward. Not a single one. Silence in this case wasn't avoidance, it was control. Every reaction they expected from me was removed from the equation. I didn't need to defend myself. I only needed to let what was already true stand without interruption. By the time the link had been open for a few hours, the tone under the video had already shifted. At first it was confusion. People clicking through, pausing, scrolling back. The same comment section that had been full of laughing emojis started filling with questions instead. Screenshots appeared, comparisons, small, corrections from people who actually understood what they were looking at. My sister's video was still there, but it no longer sat alone. It was now attached to context she didn't control. I didn't watch it unfold in real time. I went about my morning like usual, made coffee, checked my emails, answered messages that mattered. The phone kept lighting up on the table, vibrating again and again, but I didn't reach for it immediately. Not out of anger, out of distance. When I finally did look, the pattern was clear without needing emotion to interpret it. The laughter had stopped being dominant. The narrative had started to shift, not because I argued, but because the facts had interrupted the joke, and somewhere in that quiet correction, I saw the first missed call from my father, then another, and another. By the time I set the phone down again, the silence on my side had already started speaking louder than anything they had posted. By the afternoon, the distance between them and me was no longer just emotional. It was visible in how they responded. My sister's video was still up, but the comment section had changed shape completely. People weren't laughing in the same way anymore. Some were questioning why someone's private life had been turned into content. Others were sharing their own experiences of being mocked by family online. The narrative had slipped out of her control without any loud confrontation. My father's calls kept coming, then slowed, then stopped for a while. When a message finally arrived, it wasn't a joke anymore. It was short, careful, almost unsure. The tone itself said more than the words. Inside the family group chat, no one was joking now. Messages appeared and disappeared. Then silence again. The kind of silence that follows when people realize something they thought was harmless has consequences they didn't calculate. What shifted wasn't just reputation, it was perception. They were suddenly seeing me through a frame they hadn't prepared for, not as a target of humor, but as someone whose life had structure they hadn't bothered to understand. And for anyone watching this unfold, that's the real point. People don't always recognize the weight of dismissal until it comes back in a form they can't laugh through after everything's settled. I didn't feel the kind of satisfaction people expect from revenge stories. There was no rush, no celebration, no urge to replay what had happened. Just a steady kind of quiet I hadn't felt in a long time. What changed wasn't them, it was me. I stopped measuring my worth through their approval or their jokes. I stopped waiting for recognition that was never designed to come fairly. The version of me they laughed at was always incomplete in their eyes, but it had still been building something real in the background. The calls eventually slowed. Then came messages that were less defensive, more reflective. No dramatic apologies, no perfect closure. Just fragments of understanding trying to form too late. I didn't rush to respond. Some things don't need immediate answers anymore. My life didn't suddenly transform into something cinematic. The apartment was still the same. The job was still the same. But my relationship to both had changed completely. They were no longer symbols of failure or success. They were just parts of a life I owned without explanation. And in that ownership, something heavier than revenge disappeared. The need to be seen correctly by people who were never really looking. In the end, silence didn't mean defeat. It meant I had finally stopped asking permission to exist on my own terms.